The dust settled around the gallows as Jakob Stone cut down the innocent man he had promised to save. And though he arrived 3 minutes too late to stop the hanging, he kept his word by ensuring the corrupt sheriff, who'd orchestrated the false conviction, would face true justice before sundown. The year was 1876, and the Arizona Territory stretched wild and unforgiving under a relentless sun that baked the earth until it cracked like old leather. Jakob Stone had earned his reputation across 3 territories as the cowboy who never broke a promise, no matter the cost. Men respected him, outlaws feared him, and women whispered about him in parlors from Tucson to Tombstone. At 28 years old, he had lived more lifetimes than most men twice his age, carrying the weight of every vow he had ever made like iron shackles around his soul. He stood now in the town of Redemption, a settlement barely worthy of the name, consisting of a saloon, a general store, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, and maybe 24 buildings scattered along a single dusty street. The corrupt sheriff Dalton lay dead in the street, struck down in a fair fight after Jakob had gathered enough witnesses to expose the man's scheme of framing drifters for crimes they never committed. The innocent man Jakob had cut down from the gallows, a farmer named Samuel, gasped for air as the town doctor worked to revive him. The rope had done damage, but the man would live. "You kept your promise," Samuel rasped, his voice barely above a whisper, "even though you did not know me." "I said I would prove your innocence before the day ended," Jakob replied, his voice carrying the low, steady tone of a man who measured his words carefully. "The day has not ended." The crowd that had gathered to watch the hanging now murmured amongst themselves, shamefaced and uneasy. They had been ready to watch an innocent man die, swayed by a sheriff who had wielded his badge like a weapon. Jakob felt no satisfaction in their discomfort, only the familiar weight of another promise kept, another debt to his own conscience paid in full. He mounted his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Compass, and prepared to leave Redemption behind like he had left so many towns before. His saddlebags carried everything he owned: a spare shirt, ammunition for his Colt revolver, a bedroll, and a small leather journal where he recorded every promise he had ever made and kept. The journal contained hundreds of entries, each one a testament to the code he lived by. "Wait." The voice stopped him, clear and firm despite its feminine softness. Jakob turned in his saddle to see a young woman stepping out from the crowd. She wore a simple calico dress faded from too many washings, and her dark hair hung in a braid over one shoulder. What struck him immediately were her eyes, a startling shade of green that seemed to catch the late afternoon light and hold it. She could not have been more than 23 or 24 years old, and she carried herself with a determined grace that spoke of inner strength. "My name is Catherine Brennan," she said, moving closer to his horse. "I need to hire you." Jakob studied her face, noting the shadows beneath her eyes and the tension in her jaw. "I am not a gun for hire, Miss Brennan. I am not asking you to shoot anyone," she replied quickly. "I am asking you to help me find my sister. She has been missing for 6 days." Something in her voice, a tremor of barely contained desperation, made Jakob pause. He should have ridden on. He had no stake in this town or its troubles. But he found himself asking, "Have you gone to the law?" Catherine's expression hardened. "Sheriff Dalton told me she probably ran off with some man. He said girls like my sister were always looking for excitement and I should not expect her back. But Emma would never do that. She is only 19 and she would never leave without telling me. We are all each other has in this world." Jakob dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the dirt with a soft thud. He had a rule about making promises, a rule he had followed for 10 years without exception. He only made promises he knew he could keep. Finding missing people in the Arizona Territory was uncertain work at best. The desert swallowed secrets whole, and 6 days was a long time for a trail to go cold. "Tell me what happened," he said. Relief flooded Catherine's face, though she tried to hide it. 6 days ago, Emma left our home early in the morning. She works at the general store helping Mrs. Patterson with inventory and customers. She never arrived. I have searched everywhere, asked everyone, but no one has seen her. It is as if she vanished between our house and the store. How far is the walk? 10 minutes, 12 if you walk slowly. Jakob's mind worked through the possibilities. A young woman disappearing in broad daylight in a small town suggested either foul play or a planned departure. But Catherine seemed convinced her sister would not have left willingly, and he had learned to trust the instincts of people who knew their loved ones well. "I cannot promise I will find her," Jakob said carefully. "The trail is cold, and there are many things that could have happened. But I promise I will search for her until I have exhausted every possibility. I promise I will not stop looking until I have the truth of what happened to her, whatever that truth may be." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "That is all I can ask for. I do not have much money, but I can pay you what I have." "Keep your money," Jakob said. "If I find your sister alive, that will be payment enough. If I do not, then I do not deserve to be paid." He could have ridden away. He should have ridden away. But something about Catherine Brennan called to a part of himself he had long tried to bury, the part that remembered what it meant to care about something beyond the next promise, the next debt to honor. Her determination reminded him of someone he had lost long ago, someone whose memory still ached like an old wound. Jakob spent the rest of that day and all of the next investigating Emma Brennan's disappearance. He walked the route between the Brennan home and the general store 17 times, studying the ground for any sign of disturbance. He questioned everyone in town, from Mrs. Patterson at the store to the bartender at the saloon to the reverend who led Sunday services in the church. Most people remembered Emma as a quiet, polite young woman who kept to herself. No one had seen anything unusual that morning. Catherine accompanied him for much of the investigation, and Jakob found himself noticing things about her that had nothing to do with finding her sister. The way she moved with unconscious grace despite her worn boots. The intelligence in her eyes when she asked questions he had not thought to ask. The fierce loyalty that drove her to keep searching when anyone else would have given up hope. On the second evening, Jakob sat with Catherine in the small house she had shared with her sister on the edge of town. The house was neat but spare, containing only the essentials: 2 narrow beds, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and shelves lined with a few precious books. Catherine made coffee over the stove, and Jakob could tell from the careful way she measured the grounds that coffee was a luxury they could barely afford. "Tell me about your sister," Jakob said. "Not just what she looked like or where she worked. Tell me who she was." Catherine sat down across from him, cradling her coffee cup in both hands. "Emma is the dreamer in our family. I am practical, always worried about making ends meet and keeping food on the table. But Emma sees beauty everywhere. She draws pictures on any scrap of paper she can find. She talks about traveling to San Francisco someday to see the ocean. She believes good things are possible. Where are your parents? Dead. Our mother died when Emma was 11 and I was 15. Fever took her in 3 days. Our father worked as a ranch hand, but he was thrown from a horse 2 years ago, broke his neck. Since then, it has been just the 2 of us." Jakob heard the loneliness in her voice, the weight of responsibility that came from being alone in the world at too young an age. He understood that weight intimately. "How old are you, Catherine?" 24, old enough to be considered a spinster in a town like this. She said it without bitterness, just a statement of fact. "What about you, Jakob Stone? How does a man become known for never breaking a promise?" The question caught him off guard. Most people did not ask about his past, perhaps sensing that he carried ghosts he preferred to keep buried. But something about sitting in this small house with Catherine, surrounded by the simple evidence of two sisters trying to build a life together, made him want to answer honestly. "I broke a promise once," Jakob said quietly. "The most important promise I ever made. Someone died because of it. So I decided I would never break another promise for as long as I lived, no matter what it cost me." Catherine's green eyes searched his face. "That must be a heavy burden to carry." "It is the only burden I deserve to carry." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The touch startled him, warm and gentle and completely unexpected. "Whatever happened, I am certain you have punished yourself enough," she said softly. Jakob looked down at her hand on his and felt something shift inside his chest, like a door he had kept locked for years, suddenly creaking open. He withdrew his hand carefully, not wanting to hurt her feelings but knowing he could not afford this kind of connection. He had a promise to keep, and emotional entanglements only complicated things. On the third day, Jakob rode out to the surrounding ranches and homesteads, questioning anyone who might have seen something unusual. He pushed compass hard, covering miles of territory under the burning sun. The land stretched out in all directions, dotted with saguaro cacti and creosote bushes, beautiful in its harsh way but utterly unforgiving to anyone unprepared for its dangers. He returned to Redemption as the sun set, exhausted and frustrated. Every lead had turned into a dead end. It was as if Emma Brennan had simply ceased to exist that morning 6 days ago. But Jakob Stone did not believe in ghosts or miracles. Someone knew something, or something had been overlooked. Catherine was waiting for him outside the boarding house where he had taken a room. She looked as tired as he felt, her dress dusty from her own day of searching. "Anything?" she asked. "Not yet, but I am not finished." They walked together toward the small restaurant that served meals to travelers passing through town. Catherine insisted on buying him dinner, even though Jakob suspected she could barely afford to feed herself. They sat at a corner table, and the owner brought them plates of beef stew and cornbread that tasted better than anything Jakob had eaten in weeks. "Why do you do this?" Catherine asked as they ate. "Travel from town to town, keeping promises for strangers. It cannot be much of a life. It is the only life I know anymore. That is not an answer." Jakob set down his spoon and met her gaze. "When you have nothing left to live for except your word, you protect that word with everything you have. My reputation is built on keeping promises. If I break one, I lose the only thing that makes me worth anything. You are worth more than your reputation, Jakob Stone." The way she said his name, with such certainty and warmth, made his chest tighten. "You do not know me well enough to make that judgment. I know you have spent 3 days searching for a girl you have never met, asking for nothing in return. I know you risked your life to save a man from hanging yesterday. I know you look at the world like you are carrying all its sorrows on your shoulders. That tells me plenty about who you are." Jakob had no response to that. No one had looked at him the way Catherine was looking at him now, as if he were someone worthy of understanding rather than just a useful tool for solving problems. It unsettled him deeply, cutting through defenses he had spent years building. That night, Jakob lay awake in his rented room, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Catherine Brennan. He had faced down armed outlaws without his pulse quickening, but sitting across from her at dinner had made his heart race like a green boy experiencing his first infatuation. This was dangerous. He could not afford to care about her, not when he had promised to find her sister. Caring made things complicated, made judgment cloudy. But despite his logical arguments, when he finally drifted off to sleep, he dreamed of green eyes and coffee shared across a worn table. The breakthrough came on the 4th day, and it came from an unexpected source. Jakob was examining the area behind the general store, searching for any clue he might have missed, when an old man approached him. The man walked with a pronounced limp, leaning heavily on a carved walking stick, and his face bore the weathered creases of someone who had spent decades under the desert sun. "You are the one looking for the Brennan girl," the old man said. It was not a question. "I am. Do you know something?" "Maybe, maybe not." "Depends on whether you believe the ramblings of an old drunk." The man's eyes were rheumy but sharp, studying Jakob with unexpected intensity. "Name is Walter Finn. I live in a shack about a mile west of town. 6 mornings ago, I was walking back from the saloon, where I had spent the night sleeping off a bottle of whiskey. I saw a wagon heading north at a fast clip, driven by a man I did not recognize. There was someone in the back of the wagon, wrapped in a blanket or maybe canvas. Could have been supplies. Could have been a person." Jakob's pulse quickened. What time was this? Early, sun was barely up, maybe 6:30, 7 o'clock. That matched the timeline of Emma's disappearance. "Why did you not mention this before?" Walter shrugged. "Sheriff Dalton made it clear he did not want to hear my theories, called me a useless drunk and told me to keep my stories to myself. Figured there was no point in talking if no one would listen. I am listening now. Tell me everything you remember about this wagon and the man driving it." Walter closed his eyes, concentrating. "The wagon was nothing special. Standard farm wagon, maybe 10 years old, but the horses were good quality, matched bays. The man driving was big, broad across the shoulders. He wore a hat pulled low so I could not see much of his face, but I noticed his hands on the reins. He was wearing gloves, which struck me as odd given how warm it was that morning." "Which direction did he head?" "North, like I said. There is not much north of here except the Broken Creek Ranch and beyond that the mountains." Jakob knew the Broken Creek Ranch by reputation. It was owned by a man named Garrett Thorne, who had arrived in the territory 5 years ago with enough money to buy up land and cattle. Thorne kept to himself mostly, running his operation with a crew of hands who rarely came into town. There had been whispers over the years, suggestions that Thorne was not as legitimate as he appeared, but nothing concrete enough to warrant investigation. "Thank you, Walter," Jakob said, pressing a silver dollar into the old man's hand. "You may have just saved a young woman's life." He found Catherine at the general store, helping Mrs. Patterson organize shelves. When she saw the look on his face, she immediately set down the canned goods she had been stacking and followed him outside. "I have a lead," Jakob said, keeping his voice low. "It may be nothing, but it is the first real information I have found. There is a chance Emma was taken to the Broken Creek Ranch." Hope and fear warred in Catherine's expression. "What do? We do nothing. I will ride out there and investigate. I am coming with you." "Catherine, if I am right about this, it could be dangerous. Garrett Thorne is not a man to be trifled with." "She is my sister, Jakob. I will not sit here and wait while you ride into danger alone." Jakob recognized the futility of arguing. He saw the same determination in Catherine's eyes that he saw every time he looked in a mirror, the stubborn refusal to back down when something important was at stake. "All right. But you follow my lead, and if I tell you to run, you run. Agreed." "Agreed." They left within the hour, riding north under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Catherine rode a gentle mare borrowed from the livery stable, and though she was not an experienced rider, she managed well enough. Jakob set a steady pace, not wanting to exhaust the horses in the midday heat. As they rode, he found himself acutely aware of Catherine's presence beside him, the way she sat straight in the saddle despite her obvious discomfort, her jaw set with determination. "Tell me about this promise you broke," Catherine said after they had been riding for over an hour, "the one that made you this way." Jakob had known the question would come eventually. Catherine had a way of asking things that made it difficult to deflect or avoid. Her name was Sarah, he said finally. We grew up together in Texas on neighboring ranches. I loved her from the time I was 15 years old. When I turned 18, I promised her I would come back and marry her after I made enough money working cattle drives north. I promised I would return before the year was out. What happened? I got ambitious. 1 year turned into 2 because I wanted to save more money, wanted to give her a better life. I sent letters, but the mail was unreliable. When I finally did return, 2 years and 4 months after I left, I found out she had died 6 months earlier. Cholera had swept through the area, killing 30 people including Sarah and her entire family. If I had kept my promise and come back when I said I would have married her before the outbreak. I might have taken her somewhere safer. Or I might have died alongside her, but at least I would have kept my word. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. You could not have known about the cholera. That is what everyone said. But it does not change the fact that I broke my promise to her. I chose money over love, ambition over keeping my word. Sarah died thinking I had abandoned her. You were barely more than a boy, Jakob. Boys make mistakes. That mistake cost the woman I loved her life, so I made a decision. From that day forward, I would never break another promise. Every vow I make, every word I give, is in memory of the one I failed to keep. Catherine reached across the space between their horses and touched his arm. That is both the most noble and the most heartbreaking thing I have ever heard. They rode on in silence after that, but something had shifted between them. Jakob had shared a piece of himself he had never spoken aloud to anyone, and Catherine had listened without judgment or empty platitudes. He felt lighter somehow, as if the story had weighed less once it was shared. The Broken Creek Ranch appeared on the horizon as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western mountains. It was larger than Jakob had expected, with a main house built of adobe and timber, a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals containing dozens of horses and cattle. Men moved about the property going about their work, but something about the scene felt off. The ranch hands moved with military precision, and Jakob noticed that several of them wore sidearms, unusual for men doing ordinary ranch work. "Stay close to me," Jakob murmured to Catherine as they approached. "Let me do the talking." A man emerged from the main house as they dismounted. He was tall and lean, with silver threading through his dark hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. This would be Garrett Thorne, Jakob realized. The rancher's eyes were cold and calculating as he studied the two visitors. "Can I help you folks?" Thorne asked, his voice polite but carrying an undertone of steel. "My name is Jakob Stone. This is Catherine Brennan. We are looking for Catherine's sister, Emma, who has been missing for 6 days. I have reason to believe she may have been brought to this ranch." Thorne's expression did not change. "I am sorry to hear about your sister, Miss Brennan, but I can assure you she is not here. I run a legitimate cattle operation." "I have no reason to kidnap young women." "Then you would not mind if we looked around," Jakob said. "Actually, I would mind. This is private property and you have no legal authority to search it. If you have concerns, take them to the law." "The sheriff is dead," Jakob said flatly, "killed yesterday for corruption." "So there is no law in redemption at the moment except the law of doing what is right." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "You killed Sheriff Dalton." "I did, in a fair fight, after proving he had been framing innocent men for crimes they did not commit. Now, I have made a promise to Catherine that I would find her sister. I intend to keep that promise. You can let us search the ranch peacefully or things can get unpleasant. Your choice." For a long moment, Thorne said nothing. Jakob could feel the tension coiling tighter, see the ranch hands beginning to take notice of the confrontation. His hand rested casually near his revolver, ready to draw if necessary. Beside him, Catherine stood rigid with fear and hope warring on her face. You have made quite a reputation for yourself, Jakob Stone, Thorne said finally. They say you never break a promise. They also say you are faster with a gun than any man in 3 territories. I wonder which reputation is more accurate. I do not want trouble, Thorne. I just want to find Emma Brennan and take her home. If she is here, release her now and we will leave peacefully. Thorne smiled, but it was a cold smile that never reached his eyes. You are mistaken about my operation, but I can see you will not be convinced without proof. Very well. You may search the property. But know this, Stone, you are making an enemy today and I am not a forgiving man. I will take my chances. Thorne gestured to one of his men. Show them around, let them satisfy their curiosity. The ranch hand who led them on the search was a squat, muscular man who introduced himself only as Pete. He showed them through the barn, the bunkhouse, and several of the storage buildings, all while maintaining a hostile silence. Jakob studied everything carefully, looking for any sign of Emma or evidence that young women had been held here. Catherine walked beside him, her eyes searching desperately. They found nothing. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Jakob had to admit defeat. If Emma had been brought here, she was either gone now or hidden somewhere they could not access. Thorne stood watching from the porch of the main house as they mounted their horses, his expression smug. Satisfied, Stone, he called out. Jakob did not answer. He and Catherine rode back toward redemption in the gathering darkness, both lost in their own thoughts. Catherine's despair was palpable, and Jakob felt the familiar weight of a promise in danger of being broken settling over him like a suffocating blanket. I was so certain, Catherine said, her voice breaking. When you said you had a lead, I let myself hope. Walter saw something that morning, I believe him. But that does not mean Emma was brought here, or if she was, that she is still here. Then where is she, Jakob? Where is my sister? He had no answer. They rode on through the darkness, and for the first time since he had made his vow to Catherine, Jakob felt the cold edge of doubt creeping in. What if he could not find Emma? What if the trail truly had gone cold and all his skills and determination were not enough? They arrived back in Redemption late that evening, both exhausted and disheartened. Jakob helped Catherine down from her horse, and for a moment she stood close to him, so close he could see the tears she had been fighting to hold back finally spilling over. I cannot lose her, Catherine whispered. She is all I have. Without thinking, Jakob pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried against his chest. He had spent so many years keeping people at a distance, building walls around his heart, but those walls crumbled like sand in the face of Catherine's grief. He stroked her hair and murmured meaningless words of comfort, feeling helpless in a way he had not felt since Sarah died. When Catherine finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, she looked up at him with a raw vulnerability that made his heart ache. I am sorry. I am not usually this weak. You are the strongest person I have met in a long time, Jakob said, and he meant it. We will find her, Catherine. I promised you I would search until I had the truth, and I keep my promises. She nodded, trying to smile. I know you do. That is why I trust you. Trust, such a simple word, but it carried the weight of the world. Jakob realized with startling clarity that he did not want to let Catherine down, not just because of his promise, but because somewhere in the last 4 days, she had become important to him in a way that terrified him. That night, Jakob barely slept. He lay in his narrow bed reviewing every detail of the investigation, trying to find the pattern he had missed. Something about the visit to Broken Creek Ranch nagged at him. Thorne had been too cooperative, too willing to let them search. Why would a guilty man allow that unless he was confident they would not find anything? The answer came to him just before dawn. They would not find anything because Emma was not being held in any of the buildings they had searched. If Thorn was involved in something illegal, he would have a hiding place, somewhere secure and hidden from casual inspection. As soon as the sun rose, Jakob returned to the boarding house where Catherine had taken a room. He found her already awake, dressed in the same faded calico dress, her face pale from lack of sleep. "I need to go back to the ranch," Jakob said, "alone and not through the front door this time." Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. "You think she is hidden somewhere you did not see yesterday?" "I am certain of it. Thorn let us search too easily. He knew we would not find anything. But if I go back quietly at night, I might be able to search the areas he did not want us to see." "When?" "Tonight. I will spend today watching the ranch from a distance, learning the patterns of the guards, finding the best way in." "I want to come with you." "No, this is going to be dangerous, Catherine. If I am caught, I will likely have to fight my way out. I cannot do that and protect you at the same time." "Then do not protect me. Let me help." Jakob took her hands in his, struck by how small and delicate they felt despite the calluses from hard work. "If something happened to you because of me, I would never forgive myself. Please, Catherine, let me do this alone." She searched his face for a long moment and he wondered what she saw there. Finally, she nodded. "Be careful, Jakob Stone. I have already lost one person I care about. I do not want to lose another." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Catherine colored slightly, as if realizing what she had revealed, but she did not take the words back. Jakob felt something warm unfurl in his chest, something he had not felt since Sarah died, something dangerously close to hope. "I will come back," he said softly. "I promise." Jakob spent that day in the hills overlooking Broken Creek Ranch, watching through a borrowed spyglass as the ranch hands went about their work. He noted the changing of the guards, the patterns of their patrols, the areas of the property that seemed to receive particular attention. There was a small building behind the main house, half hidden by cottonwood trees, that was visited frequently by Thorn himself, but never by any of the other men. Jakob focused his attention on that building, intuition telling him it was significant. As darkness fell, Jakob prepared himself for what lay ahead. He checked his revolver, making sure it was loaded and ready, though he hoped he would not need to use it. He secured his knife in his boot and made sure his rope was coiled properly at his saddle. This would require stealth and patience, skills he had honed over years of tracking outlaws across harsh terrain. He approached the ranch on foot under the cover of darkness, leaving Compass tethered a safe distance away. The moon was a thin crescent, providing just enough light to navigate by without exposing him too clearly. Jakob moved like a shadow, using every bit of cover the landscape provided, avoiding the sight lines of the guards he had observed earlier. It took him nearly an hour to reach the small building behind the main house. Up close, he could see it was sturdier than it appeared from a distance, built with heavy timber and fitted with a solid door secured by a substantial lock. This was not a storage shed or a tool room. This was built to contain something valuable or someone. Jakob examined the lock, considering his options. He could try to pick it, but that would take time he might not have. He could shoot it off, but that would alert everyone on the ranch to his presence. As he weighed his choices, he heard voices approaching from the main house. He pressed himself against the wall of the building, melting into the shadows. Two men emerged from the house, one of them carrying a tray covered with a cloth. As they came closer, Jakob recognized one of them as Garrett Thorn. "She's still refusing to eat?" Thorn asked. "Hardly touched yesterday's meal," the other man replied. "Stubborn little thing." "Let her starve if she wants, makes no difference to me. The buyer is coming tomorrow night. Once she is sold and gone, we can move on to the next town." Jakob's blood ran cold. Buyer, sold. Emma Brennan was not just being held captive. She was being trafficked, sold like livestock to the highest bidder, and from the way Thorne spoke, this was not his first time doing this. How many other young women had disappeared from small towns across the territory, their fates never known? The men unlocked the building and went inside. Jakob heard a woman's voice, young and defiant, though he could not make out the words. That had to be Emma. She was alive. When the men emerged a few minutes later, locking the door behind them, Jakob waited until they had returned to the main house before moving. He could not risk trying to break Emma out now, not with the entire ranch between them and freedom. But he needed to let her know that help was coming, that her sister had not given up on her. He moved to the small window set high in the wall of the building. It was barred, but the bars were spaced wide enough for a person to see through. Jakob picked up a handful of pebbles and tossed one gently at the window, then another. On the third try, a face appeared at the window, pale in the darkness. "Emma Brennan," Jakob whispered. The face drew closer to the bars. "Who are you?" "My name is Jakob Stone. Your sister Catherine hired me to find you. I am going to get you out of here, but not tonight." "Tonight I just needed to know you were alive." "Catherine." Emma's voice broke on her sister's name. "Is she all right?" "She is worried sick about you, but she is safe. Listen carefully. Tomorrow night, Thorne is planning to sell you to someone. I will not let that happen. Sometime before then, I will come back with help and we will get you out of here. Can you hold on until then?" "I do not have much choice." "Yes, you do. You can give up or you can stay strong and believe that help is coming. Your sister never stopped looking for you, Emma. She never gave up hope. Can you be as strong as she has been?" There was a pause, and then Emma said, "Tell her I love her. Tell her I never doubted she would find me. You can tell her yourself tomorrow." Jakob slipped away from the building as silently as he had arrived, his mind already working on a plan. He could not assault the ranch alone, not against Thorne and all his men. But he also could not wait for the territorial marshal to arrive, assuming he could even get word to the marshal in time. He needed help, and he needed it fast. By the time he made it back to Compass and rode into Redemption, dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains. He found Catherine pacing in front of the boarding house, her face drawn with worry. When she saw him, relief flooded her features. "Thank God," she breathed. "I was afraid something had happened to you." "I found her," Jakob said, dismounting. "Emma is alive, and she is being held in a secure building on Thorne's ranch. But it is worse than we thought, Catherine. Thorne is not just holding her. He is planning to sell her to someone tomorrow night. He has been trafficking young women probably for years." Catherine swayed on her feet, and Jakob caught her arm to steady her. "We have to get her out. We have to go now." "We will, but I need help. I cannot take on Thorne and all his men alone. I need to gather some people I can trust, men who will stand with us." "How?" "Who in this town will risk their lives against Garrett Thorne?" Jakob thought about that question as the sun climbed higher, painting Redemption's dusty street in shades of gold. The answer came to him as he watched the townspeople beginning their daily routines, the same people who had been willing to watch an innocent man hang just days ago. "The men who owe me," Jakob said. "I saved Samuel's life. I exposed Dalton's corruption and freed other men who had been falsely accused. Some of those men are still in town. And there are others, good men who are tired of living in fear of corrupt ranchers and lawmen. If I can convince them that standing up to Thorne is the right thing to do, they will come." It took Jakob most of that day to gather a group of men willing to ride with him. Samuel, the farmer he had cut down from the gallows, was the first to volunteer despite still bearing the rope burns on his neck. Walter Finn, the old drunk who had provided the crucial information about the wagon, insisted on coming even though he could barely walk. The bartender from the saloon, a former soldier named Marcus who had been one of Dalton's victims, brought 3 others with him. By late afternoon, Jakob had assembled 12 men, all armed and ready to ride. They gathered at the edge of town as the sun began to set, checking their weapons and preparing for what lay ahead. Jakob stood before them, Catherine at his side, and felt the weight of their trust settling on his shoulders. "I will not lie to you," Jakob said. "What we are about to do is dangerous. Garrett Thorne has money, men, and no conscience. Some of us may not come back from this, but a young woman's life depends on what we do tonight. Emma Brennan is being held prisoner, and if we do not save her, she will be sold into a fate worse than death. I have promised Catherine that I will find her sister and bring her home. I always keep my promises, but I cannot do this alone. Will you ride with me?" The men answered with a chorus of affirmations, their voices strong and determined. Jakob felt something he had not felt in years, the strength that came from standing with others for a righteous cause rather than walking alone. Catherine stepped forward before they could mount up. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying to all of them. "All of you. My sister and I are strangers to most of you. You have no reason to risk your lives for us. But you are doing it anyway, and I will never forget that." "Your sister is not a stranger," Samuel said gruffly. "She is one of us, a member of this community. Thorne has been terrorizing this territory for too long, taking what he wants without consequence. It is time someone stood up to him." The ride to Broken Creek Ranch took less than an hour, the group moving swiftly through the darkening landscape. Jakob had outlined his plan during the gathering. Half the men would create a distraction at the front of the property, while Jakob and the others went for the building where Emma was held. It was not sophisticated, but it did not need to be. They had surprise on their side and the motivation of fighting for something that mattered. As they approached the ranch, Jakob had the men split into two groups. He turned to Catherine, who had insisted on coming despite his protests. "Stay back until we have secured Emma." "Please, Catherine, I need to know you are safe." "I am not letting you walk into danger alone," she said stubbornly. "I am not alone. I have 11 good men with me." Jakob took her face in his hands, a gesture that felt both completely natural and utterly terrifying. "Please, do this for me." Catherine looked like she wanted to argue, but finally she nodded. "Come back to me, Jakob Stone, you promised." "I did, and I always keep my promises." Jakob led his group around to the back of the ranch while Marcus and his men approached from the front. They moved in silence, using the darkness and the terrain as cover. Jakob had his revolver drawn, though he hoped to avoid gunfire if possible. The goal was to get Emma out safely, not to start a war. The sound of gunshots erupted from the front of the property, Marcus and his men initiating the distraction. Jakob heard shouting as Thorne's ranch hands scrambled to respond to the threat. This was their chance. He ran to the building where Emma was held, Samuel and Walter close behind him. The lock on the door was substantial, but Samuel had brought tools from his farm. Between the three of them, they managed to force the door open in less than 2 minutes, the wood splintering under their combined effort. Emma huddled in the corner of the small room, her eyes wide with fear. She looked so much like Catherine, the same dark hair and bone structure, though her green eyes were a shade lighter. When she saw Jakob, recognition dawned on her face. "You came back," she whispered. "I made a promise. Can you walk?" Emma nodded, getting to her feet. She was thin and weak from days of captivity and little food, but her spirit was unbroken. Jakob wrapped his coat around her shoulders and led her out of the building. That was when Garrett Thorne appeared, blocking their path. He held a rifle leveled at Jakob's chest, his face twisted with rage. "You just could not let it go, could you, Stone? Could not mind your own business and ride away? Your business became my business when you took an innocent girl," Jakob said calmly, positioning himself between Thorne and Emma. "Let us pass, Thorne. Your ranch is under siege. You have lost." "Have I?" Thorne smiled coldly. I still have this rifle pointed at your heart. Even if your men somehow manage to defeat my crew, you will not be alive to celebrate. You might kill me, Jakob acknowledged, but the moment you pull that trigger, my men will shoot you down. Is that worth it? Is murdering one man worth dying for? You ruined everything, Stone. 5 years I have been running this operation, taking girls from towns too small to attract attention, selling them to buyers across the territory and beyond. I have made a fortune. And you have destroyed it all in less than a week because of some misguided sense of honor. Honor is never misguided. What you have been doing is evil and it ends tonight. For a long moment, neither man moved. Jakob could see Thorne's finger tightening on the trigger, could feel Samuel and Walter tensing behind him. The sound of fighting continued from the front of the ranch, punctuated by gunfire and shouting. Everything balanced on the edge of a knife. Then Catherine stepped into the clearing and everything changed. She moved into Thorne's line of sight, her face set with determination. Let them go, Mr. Thorne, you are done here. Whether you pull that trigger or not, you have lost. The territorial marshal will hear about what you have been doing. Every law official in Arizona will be looking for you. Your only chance is to run now and hope you can disappear before they catch you. Catherine, get back, Jakob said urgently. No. She walked toward Thorne, fearless despite the rifle in his hands. I need you to understand something, Mr. Thorne. The man you are pointing that rifle at is the best man I have ever known. He never breaks a promise. He never abandons people who need him. He spent days searching for my sister when he could have ridden away and never looked back, and I will not let you kill him. Thorne's attention had shifted to Catherine, and Jakob saw his opening. He drew and fired in one smooth motion, the bullet striking Thorne's rifle and sending it flying from his hands before the rancher could react. Samuel and Walter rushed forward, tackling Thorne to the ground before he could recover. The fight was over quickly after that. With their leader captured, Thorne's men surrendered rather than continue fighting for a lost cause. Marcus and his group herded them together while Jakob secured Thorne with rope, binding him tightly enough that escape would be impossible. Emma broke away from Walter and ran to Catherine, the two sisters colliding in a fierce embrace. They both cried, holding each other and murmuring words too soft for anyone else to hear. Jakob watched them reunite and felt the familiar satisfaction of a promise kept, but this time it was accompanied by something deeper, a joy that transcended mere duty. Catherine looked up from her sister's shoulder and met Jakob's eyes across the clearing. The gratitude and something more in her gaze made his breath catch. He had kept his promise to her, found her sister and brought her home safely. The debt was paid. He could ride away now with his honor intact and his reputation enhanced. He could return to his solitary existence, moving from town to town, keeping promises for strangers. But as he looked at Catherine Brennan, her face illuminated by the lanterns his men had lit, he realized with startling clarity that he did not want to leave. For the first time since Sarah died, he wanted something more than the next promise to keep. They brought Garrett Thorne and his captured men back to redemption as dawn broke over the desert. The townspeople emerged from their homes and businesses to witness the return, their faces showing a mixture of shock and vindication. Word spread quickly about what Thorne had been doing, and Jakob watched as anger replaced the fear that had kept the community silent for so long. The territorial marshal arrived 3 days later, summoned by a telegram Marcus had sent. Marshal William Hayes was a grizzled veteran with a reputation for honesty, and he listened carefully as Jakob and the others recounted everything they had discovered. Emma gave her testimony about being kidnapped from the street in broad daylight, drugged and taken to Thorne's ranch where she had been held for 6 days. When the marshal and his deputies searched Broken Creek Ranch thoroughly, They found evidence of at least 8 other girls who had passed through Thorne's operation over the previous years, some of whom were identified, and some who remained nameless victims. Thorne was taken to the territorial capital to stand trial, along with the men who had assisted him. The marshal assured the people of redemption that justice would be served, and for once, Jakob believed him. During those days of testimony and investigation, Jakob found himself spending more and more time with Catherine. What had begun as a professional relationship forged in crisis had transformed into something neither of them had expected. They took long walks together in the evening after the heat of the day had passed, talking about everything and nothing. Catherine told him about her dreams of building a better life for herself and Emma, perhaps opening a dress shop or a bakery. Jakob found himself talking about things he had not spoken of in years. His childhood in Texas, the joy he had felt working with horses before Sarah died, the loneliness of his nomadic existence. "Do you ever think about settling down?" Catherine asked one evening as they sat on the steps of the church, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of purple and orange. "Finding a place to call home?" "I used to think about it," Jakob admitted. "Before Sarah died, I dreamed of buying land, building a house, raising a family. But after I lost her, those dreams seemed pointless. I convinced myself that I did not deserve that kind of happiness, that I needed to spend my life making up for the promise I broke." "You have spent 10 years punishing yourself, Jakob. Do you not think that is enough? Some debts can never be fully repaid." Catherine turned to face him, her green eyes intense in the fading light. "What if Sarah would not want you to live this way? What if she would want you to be happy, to find love again, to build the life you dreamed of together?" The question hit Jakob like a physical blow. He had never allowed himself to consider what Sarah might want for him, had been so focused on his guilt that he had not thought about the woman he had loved, and what she would say about the man he had become. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I do not know what she would want." "I know what I want," Catherine said softly. She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I want you to stay, Jakob. I want you to give yourself permission to be more than a man who keeps promises. I want you to be the man I have come to care about more than I ever thought possible." Jakob looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. He thought about all the promises he had kept over the past 10 years, the endless succession of vows fulfilled and debts honored. But he realized that in all that time, he had never promised anything to himself. He had never made a commitment to his own happiness, his own future. "I am afraid," he said, the admission costing him more than facing down a dozen armed men. "I am afraid that if I let myself care about you the way I am starting to, I will lose you the way I lost Sarah. I am afraid that I will break another promise and destroy us both." "Life does not come with guarantees, Jakob. We could both die tomorrow, or we could live 50 more years together. But if we do not take the chance, if we let fear dictate our choices, then we are already dead in the ways that matter most." She was right. Jakob knew she was right. He had been living like a ghost for 10 years, going through the motions of existence without truly being alive. Catherine was offering him a chance to change that, to step back into the light and risk everything for the possibility of something real. "I would need to stay in redemption," Jakob said slowly, thinking through what that would mean. "I would need to find work, a way to support myself without riding from town to town keeping promises. There is a ranch for sale just west of town. The Hendersons are moving back east to be near their daughter. They have been looking for a buyer for months. You know horses better than anyone I have met. You could raise and train them. That would take money I do not have, but I do." Emma's voice came from behind them, and they both turned to see her standing in the doorway of the church. She smiled apologetically. "I am sorry for eavesdropping, but I could not help overhearing." Mr. Stone, you saved my life. You gave me back my future. The least I can do is help you build yours. My father left us a small inheritance, money Catherine and I have been saving for emergencies. We would like to invest it in your ranch. Jakob stood, overwhelmed by the offer. I cannot accept that. Your father left that money for you and Catherine, not for a stranger. You are not a stranger, Emma said firmly. You are family. Anyone willing to risk their life for someone they barely know deserves to be called family. Catherine rose and stood beside her sister, presenting a united front. We want to do this, Jakob. We believe in you. The question is, do you believe in yourself enough to try? Jakob looked at these two remarkable women, who had somehow seen past his armor of duty and honor to the broken man underneath. They were offering him not just financial help, but emotional investment, a vote of confidence in his ability to be more than he had allowed himself to be. If I do this, Jakob said carefully, if I stay and build this ranch and try to make a life here, I need to make something clear. He took Catherine's hands in his, holding her gaze. I am not good at this, at letting people close or accepting that I deserve happiness. I will probably mess this up in 100 different ways, but I want to try, I want to stay. And I want to see where this goes between us. Catherine's smile was like sunrise breaking over the desert, bright and beautiful and full of promise. That is all I am asking for, a chance. A beginning. Jakob pulled her close and kissed her for the first time, right there on the church steps with Emma watching and the last light of day fading into night. The kiss was tentative at first, both of them learning the shape and feel of each other, but it deepened into something powerful and true. When they finally pulled apart, Jakob realized he was smiling, really smiling for the first time in 10 years. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. With the money from the Brennan sisters and what Jakob had saved over the years, he purchased the Henderson Ranch. It was smaller than he had dreamed of as a young man, but it was well maintained with good grazing land, a sturdy barn, and a house that needed work but had good bones. Marcus and several other men from the group that had rescued Emma volunteered their time to help Jakob make repairs and improvements. The community of redemption had been transformed by the events of the past weeks, bound together by shared struggle and triumph. Catherine and Emma moved into the ranch house with Jakob, propriety be damned. In a frontier town that had just seen its sheriff killed for corruption and a rancher arrested for human trafficking, no one was inclined to complain about living arrangements. Besides, it made practical sense. The Brennan sisters had given up their rented house in town, and the ranch house had more than enough room for all three of them. Jakob threw himself into the work of building his new life with the same intensity he had once devoted to keeping promises. He spent his days breaking horses, mending fences, and learning the rhythms of ranch life. Catherine proved to be a natural with the business side of things, keeping the books and negotiating with buyers in town. Emma helped with the domestic work, but also revealed a talent for training dogs, acquiring 2 puppies that she began training to help herd livestock. But the best moments came in the evenings, when the work was done, and the three of them sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Jakob found himself relaxing in ways he had not thought possible, the constant tension that had defined his life for a decade slowly unwinding. He laughed more, talked more, allowed himself to simply exist without the weight of unkept promises hanging over him. One evening, about 6 weeks after he had purchased the ranch, Catherine found Jakob in the barn tending to a mare that had thrown a shoe. She watched him work in silence for a few minutes, admiring the gentle competence with which he handled the large animal. "You are good at this," she said finally. "You should have been doing this all along." Jakob looked up and smiled. "Maybe, but if I had, I never would have come to redemption. I never would have met you. Do you believe in fate?" That we were meant to meet? I do not know. I used to think I had control over my life, that if I just kept my promises and did the right things, I could avoid tragedy. But Sarah's death taught me that control is an illusion. Maybe fate exists, or maybe we are just lucky when good things happen. Either way, I am grateful I found you. Catherine moved closer, running her hand along the horse's neck. Emma and I have been talking. We think it is time we made our arrangement more formal. Jakob's heart began to beat faster. What kind of formal? The kind where you and I stop pretending we are just business partners and housemates. The kind where we acknowledge what we both know is true. We love each other and we want to build a life together. The kind where you ask me to marry you, Jakob Stone. Jakob set down the horse's hoof and straightened to his full height. Catherine stood before him in her work dress, her hair escaping from its braid in wisps around her face, dust on her cheeks from a day of hard labor. She had never looked more beautiful to him. Catherine Brennan, Jakob said, his voice rough with emotion. I have kept hundreds of promises over the past 10 years. But there is one promise I want to make that is more important than all the others combined. I promise to love you for the rest of my life. I promise to stand beside you in good times and bad. I promise to be the man you deserve even when I fall short, because I will always try. Will you marry me? Yes, Catherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Jakob pulled her into his arms and kissed her, pouring 10 years of loneliness and longing, and finally found joy into that single moment. The horse whinnied softly beside them, as if offering her own blessing on the union. They were married 3 weeks later in the same church where they had shared their first kiss. The entire town of Redemption turned out for the ceremony, eager to celebrate the couple who had brought justice and hope to their community. Samuel stood up as Jakob's best man, and Emma served as Catherine's maid of honor. Marshal Hayes had returned for the wedding, bringing news that Garrett Thorne had been convicted and sentenced to life in the territorial prison. Jakob stood at the altar watching Catherine walk toward him in a simple white dress that Emma had sewn for her, and he felt the final pieces of his broken heart clicking back into place. When the Reverend asked if he would take Catherine as his wife to love and cherish for the rest of his days, Jakob answered with the same certainty he brought to every promise he made. I will. I promise. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Building a successful ranch required long hours and hard work, and there were times when money was tight and the future uncertain. But Jakob and Catherine faced every obstacle together, their love deepening with each shared struggle and triumph. Emma thrived on the ranch, her drawings now filling the walls of their home, her trained dogs proving invaluable for managing their growing herd. Jakob discovered that keeping promises to his wife was different from the vows he had spent years fulfilling for strangers. When he promised Catherine he would be home before dark, it was not duty that drove him but the desire to see her face light up when he walked through the door. When he promised to love her through sickness and health, it was not abstract honor but the visceral need to protect and cherish the woman who had given him back his life. One evening in late autumn, nearly a year and a half after they had married, Jakob and Catherine sat on the porch watching the sunset. Catherine had news, the kind of news that changed everything, and she had been waiting for the right moment to share it. I saw the doctor in town today, she said, taking Jakob's hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. We are going to have a baby. You are going to be a father. Jakob stared at her, the words taking a moment to fully penetrate. A baby, a child. The family he had dreamed of with Sarah, the future he had convinced himself he did not deserve, was suddenly, miraculously real. Are you certain? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Very certain. The doctor thinks the baby will come in the spring, probably late April or early May. Jakob pulled Catherine into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which to him she was. "I promise I will be a good father," he said fiercely. "I promise I will protect and provide for our child. I promise I will teach them to be strong and kind and true to their word." "I know you will," Catherine said, kissing his cheek. "You keep your promises, Jakob Stone. It is what you do." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, Catherine glowing with health despite the usual discomforts. Emma fussed over her sister constantly, and Jakob found himself hovering protectively whenever Catherine tried to do any heavy work. Together, they prepared a nursery in one of the spare bedrooms, Jakob building a cradle from oak wood with his own hands, carving intricate designs into the headboard. As winter gave way to spring, Jakob thought often about promises and what they meant. For so long, he had viewed promises as burdens, debts that needed to be paid to atone for his past failures. But now he understood that the best promises were not obligations but gifts, commitments made freely out of love rather than duty. One night, lying in bed with Catherine curled against his side and her pregnant belly pressed against him, Jakob felt their baby kick for the first time. The sensation was startling and wonderful, a tiny life making its presence known, reminding him that the future was not something to fear but something to embrace. "I have been thinking," Jakob said softly, "about what I will tell our son or daughter about promises, about why they matter and how to keep them." "And what will you say?" "I will tell them that a promise is a piece of your soul given to another person. That breaking a promise does not just hurt the person you made it to, but damages something inside yourself. But I will also tell them that the most important promises are the ones made with love, not obligation. That promising to love someone, to build a life with them, to raise a family together, those are the promises worth keeping above all others." Catherine tilted her face up to kiss him. "Our child will be lucky to have you as a father. I will do my best, that is all I can promise." Their son was born on a warm evening in late April, arriving with a healthy cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him Samuel, after the man Jakob had saved and who had become one of his closest friends. Baby Samuel had Catherine's green eyes and Jakob's dark hair, and from the moment Jakob held his son for the first time, he understood what it meant to have your heart walking around outside your body. The next few years passed in a golden haze of family life. The ranch prospered, Jakob's skill with horses earning him a reputation that brought buyers from across the territory. Catherine managed the business side with shrewd intelligence, turning their modest operation into a thriving enterprise. Emma married Marcus, the bartender-turned-deputy who had helped rescue her, and they built a house on the western edge of Jakob and Catherine's property. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, mimicking Jakob's walk and trying to help with the ranch work despite his small size. When Samuel was 3, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after the girl Jakob had loved and lost so many years ago. Catherine had suggested the name, understanding that honoring Jakob's past was not a threat, but a way of acknowledging how far he had come. One evening, when Samuel was 5 and Sarah was 2, Jakob sat on the porch watching his children play in the yard while Catherine prepared dinner inside. Emma and Marcus were visiting, their own baby daughter sleeping in Emma's arms. Jakob thought about the man he had been when he first rode into redemption nearly 7 years ago, alone and driven by guilt, convinced that he deserved nothing but an existence of solitary duty. That man would barely recognize the person Jakob had become. He had friends now, a community that relied on him not just for his skills but for his presence. He had family, a wife he loved more deeply with each passing day and children who filled his life with joy and purpose. He had a home, land that belonged to him, a future that stretched out bright with possibility. Samuel ran up to the porch, his face flushed with exertion. "Papa, you promised we could go riding tomorrow. Do you remember?" "I remember," Jakob said, pulling his son onto his lap. "I always remember my promises." "Why are promises so important, Papa?" Jakob considered the question seriously, knowing that what he said now would shape how his son viewed the world. Because promises are how we show people they can trust us. When you make a promise and keep it, you are telling someone that your word matters, that you are reliable. And in this world, Samuel, being someone people can rely on is one of the most important things you can be. Have you ever broken a promise? The question pierced Jakob's heart, bringing back memories he had not dwelled on in years. "Once," he said honestly, "a long time ago before you were born. I broke a promise to someone I loved very much and it hurt her badly. I decided then that I would never break another promise as long as I lived. And you have not." "No, son, I have not." "What was the promise you made to Mama when you got married?" Jakob smiled, remembering that day in the church, the way Catherine had looked walking toward him in her white dress. "I promised to love her past forever," he said. "That is how much I love your mother, not just forever but past it, beyond it, into whatever comes after. I promised her a love that would never end." Samuel thought about this seriously. That is a big promise. It is the biggest promise I ever made, and it is the easiest one to keep because loving your mother is as natural as breathing. Catherine appeared in the doorway, their daughter Sarah on her hip. She must have heard the last part of the conversation because her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Dinner is ready," she said softly. The family gathered around the table, Emma and Marcus joining them with their baby. As they shared the meal Catherine had prepared, the conversation flowing easily between adults and children, Jakob felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was what he had been searching for without knowing it during all those years of wandering and promise-keeping. Not redemption or absolution, but simply this: a place to belong, people to love, a purpose beyond atonement. After dinner, when the children had been put to bed and Emma and Marcus had returned to their own home, Jakob and Catherine sat together on the porch in the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. The night was cool and clear, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Do you ever miss it?" Catherine asked. The traveling, the adventure, being known across 3 territories as the man who never breaks a promise. Jakob thought about the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it." When your whole life is focused on keeping one promise after another, you do not have to think about anything else. But I do not miss the loneliness. I do not miss lying awake at night with nothing but ghosts for company. I do not miss believing I did not deserve happiness. Do you believe you deserve it now? I believe that happiness is not something we earn or deserve. It is something we allow ourselves to accept when it is offered. You offered me happiness, Catherine, and I was smart enough to take it. That is not about deserving, it is about being brave enough to reach for what you want. Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder. I am glad you were brave enough. I cannot imagine my life without you now. Nor I without you. You saved me, Catherine, not just from loneliness but from myself, from a life that was really just a slow death. You taught me that keeping promises to the people you love is different from keeping promises to strangers. Both matter, but one is rooted in obligation while the other is rooted in joy. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Horses moving in the corral, the distant call of a coyote, the soft rustle of wind through the cottonwood trees. Jakob thought about time and promises and love, about how he had spent 10 years trying to atone for one broken promise by keeping hundreds of others, never understanding that the real path to healing was not endless penance, but allowing himself to love again. Tell me about Sarah, Catherine said suddenly. Your first Sarah, you never talk about her, and I think you should. She was important to you, and I do not want you to feel like you have to hide that part of yourself from me." Jakob was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. He had not spoken about Sarah to anyone in years, had tried to keep her memory locked away in a place where it could not hurt him. But Catherine deserved to know, deserved to understand the woman who had shaped so much of who he had become. "She was kind," Jakob said finally. "That is the first thing I remember about her, her kindness. She could not walk past an injured bird without trying to help it. She always had time for people others ignored, the hired hands, the children, the old folks. And she laughed easily, finding joy in small things. A pretty sunset, a good meal, a joke told around the campfire. She sounds wonderful. She was, and I failed her. I chose ambition over love, money over keeping my word. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late to fix it." Catherine took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You were young, Jakob. Young men make mistakes. They chase dreams without understanding what they are giving up. You cannot punish yourself forever for being human. I know. And I have finally learned that the best way to honor Sarah's memory is not by refusing to be happy, but by living the kind of life she would have wanted for me. A life full of love and family and purpose. That is why I named our daughter after her. Not because I am stuck in the past, but because I wanted to acknowledge that Sarah's love, even though it ended too soon, helped shape the man I became. Without losing her, I never would have learned the value of keeping promises. Without that lesson, I might have ridden through redemption without stopping. I never would have met you." "Do you think she would have liked me?" Catherine asked with a small smile. "She would have loved you. How could she not? You are everything good in this world, Catherine. You are strong and brave and loyal. You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. You gave me a reason to stay when every instinct told me to keep running." They sat together late into the night, talking about the past and the future, about dreams and plans and the children sleeping inside the house. When they finally went to bed, Jakob held Catherine close and thought about promises and how they had defined his life. The broken promise that had haunted him for so long. The kept promises that had earned him a reputation but no peace. And the greatest promise of all, the one he had made to Catherine on their wedding day, to love her past forever. That promise he knew he would keep until his last breath and beyond, into whatever realm came after this life. Because loving Catherine was not a burden or an obligation or a debt to be paid. It was the greatest joy he had ever known, the thing that made every other promise meaningful. Years passed, and the ranch continued to prosper. Samuel grew into a young man who shared his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for business. Sarah became a confident, clever girl who could outride and outshoot most of the boys her age. Emma and Marcus had 3 more children, and the combined families made the ranch a lively, joyful place filled with laughter and love. Jakob found new ways to serve the community of redemption, using his reputation and resources to help settle disputes and protect those who could not protect themselves. But he no longer traveled, no longer wandered from town to town seeking promises to keep. His promises now were all to the people he loved, the family he had built, the community he called home. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Catherine organized a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to honor the couple whose love story had become legendary in the territory. Samuel, now 13, gave a speech about his parents that left hardly a dry eye in the crowd. Emma told the story of how Jakob had rescued her and brought her home, forever changing the fate of the Brennan sisters. But the moment Jakob treasured most came late that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep. He and Catherine sat on the porch where they had spent so many evenings, looking out over the land they had built together. 10 years, Catherine said wonderingly. It feels like a lifetime and a moment all at once. The best 10 years of my life, Jakob replied. Everything before you was just preparation, just wandering until I found where I belonged. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Emma had not been taken, if I had never needed to hire you to find her? All the time. And every time I think about it, I am grateful beyond words that fate or chance or whatever force governs the universe brought us together. Even though the circumstances were terrible, even though Emma suffered, something good came from it. We found each other. Catherine turned to face him, her green eyes reflecting the starlight. Do you remember what you told Samuel about the promise you made to me, about loving me past forever? I remember. Every word I said was true. I know it was. That is what I love most about you, Jakob Stone. When you make a promise, you keep it. Not because you have to, but because your word is who you are. And you promised to love me past forever, which means I will never have to doubt you, never have to wonder if your feelings will change. I have the security of knowing that your love is as permanent as the stars. Jakob pulled her close, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I will love you past forever, he whispered against her hair. That is not just a promise, Catherine, it is the truest thing I know. More years passed, marked by the milestones that measure a well-lived life. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, and they built their own home on Jakob and Catherine's land, expanding the family operation. Sarah showed an interest in medicine and went east to study, returning 2 years later as one of the first female doctors in the territory. Emma and Marcus's children grew and thrived, some staying to work the land and others seeking their fortunes elsewhere. Jakob's hair turned silver, and lines deepened around Catherine's eyes, but their love remained as strong as it had been that first year. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, personal losses and community struggles, always facing everything together as a united front. One evening, when Jakob was 56 and Catherine 52, they sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Samuel's 4 children mixed with Sarah's 2, in a chaotic, joyful melee of shouting and laughter. Emma and Marcus visited weekly with their own growing collection of grandchildren, and the house that had once seemed too large for just 3 people now burst at the seams with family. We did well, Catherine said, gesturing to the scene before them. Look at what we built, Jakob, not just the ranch or the business, but this family, this legacy. Our children and grandchildren will remember us not just for what we owned, but for how we loved. That is all because of you, Jakob said. I was a broken man when we met, Catherine. I had convinced myself that keeping promises to strangers was enough, that I did not need or deserve anything more. You showed me there was a different way to live, a better way. Everything good in my life now traces back to you. We saved each other, Catherine corrected gently. I was alone and scared when Emma disappeared. I had lost hope. You gave me back my sister and showed me that good men still existed in this world. We both needed what the other could provide. That is what made us perfect for each other. Jakob thought about the man he had been nearly 30 years ago when he first rode into redemption. That younger version of himself would barely recognize the life he now led, surrounded by family, rooted in community, content in a way he had never imagined possible. But he would recognize the core principle that still guided every action. A promise made was a debt that had to be honored. The difference was that now, his most important promises were not to strangers but to the people he loved. His promise to Catherine to love her past forever. His promise to his children to provide for them and guide them. His promise to his community to use his resources and reputation for good. These were not obligations that weighed him down but commitments that gave his life meaning and purpose. I need to tell you something, Catherine said, her voice taking on a serious tone. "The doctor in town told me last week that my heart is weakening. He said I might have a year, maybe 2 if I am lucky, but not much more than that." Jakob felt as if someone had punched him in the chest, driving all the air from his lungs. "No," he said flatly, "that cannot be right. You are fine, you are strong." "I am tired, Jakob." "I have been tired for months now, but I did not want to worry you. The truth is, I have been feeling my mortality pressing in on me, not in a frightening way, but as a simple fact. We all die eventually. Mine is coming sooner than we hoped, but it is coming. We will get you the best doctors. We will go to San Francisco or Denver or wherever we need to go to find treatment. I am not losing you, Catherine, I cannot." She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Listen to me, I have lived a good life, a wonderful life. I have been loved deeply and completely by the best man I have ever known. I have children and grandchildren who bring me joy every day. I am not afraid of dying, Jakob. I am only afraid of leaving you alone. Then do not leave me, fight this, stay with me. I will stay as long as I can, but when my time comes, I need you to promise me something. I need you to promise me you will not let grief consume you the way it did after Sarah died. I need you to keep living, keep loving, keep being the father and grandfather our family needs. Can you promise me that?" Jakob wanted to refuse, wanted to tell her he could not make that promise because he had no idea how to live without her. But he saw the pleading in her eyes, understood that she needed this assurance to face what was coming. And he had never broken a promise to Catherine. He would not start now. "I promise," he said, his voice breaking. "I promise I will keep living. I will not let grief destroy me. I will be there for our family. I will honor your memory by living the kind of life you would want for me. I promise, Catherine." She smiled, relief evident in her expression. "Thank you. That is all I needed to hear." Catherine fought valiantly for the next 18 months, refusing to let her failing health keep her from participating in family life. She attended Samuel's youngest daughter's wedding. She helped Sarah deliver 3 babies in difficult circumstances, her knowledge and steady presence making the difference between life and death. She celebrated Emma's 60th birthday with a party that brought together friends and family from across the territory. But in the end, even Catherine's formidable will was not enough to hold back death. She passed away on a cool autumn evening, surrounded by family, with Jakob holding her hand. Her last words were to him, spoken so softly only he could hear them. "Past forever, Jakob, I will love you past forever." Then she closed her eyes and was gone, leaving Jakob with a hole in his heart that he knew would never fully heal. The grief was enormous, threatening to swallow him whole. For weeks after the funeral, Jakob barely functioned, going through the motions of daily life without really being present. But he remembered his promise to Catherine, his vow that he would not let grief consume him. So he forced himself to keep going, to show up for his family, to continue the work of the ranch. Slowly, painfully, the grief softened from a sharp agony to a dull ache. Jakob learned to carry Catherine's memory with him not as a burden but as a treasured companion. He talked to her sometimes when he was alone, telling her about the grandchildren and the ranch and how much he missed her. And in those quiet moments, he felt her presence, a warmth in his chest that assured him she had kept her promise. She loved him past forever, and that love continued even in her absence. Years passed. Jakob grew old, his body weakening but his mind remaining sharp. Samuel took over day-to-day operations of the ranch, though Jakob still advised on important decisions. His grandchildren had children of their own, and Jakob found joy in being a great-grandfather, teaching the little ones about horses and promises and love that lasted past forever. One evening, when Jakob was 73 years old, he sat on the porch of the ranch house and watched the sunset. The sky was ablaze with color. oranges and purples and reds painting the clouds in shades of impossible beauty. He thought about the promises he had kept over the course of his life, the hundreds of vows honored and debts paid. But the most important promises, he knew, were the ones made to the people he loved. His promise to Sarah, broken in youth but leading him to a life of honor and integrity. His promise to Catherine to find her sister, which had brought him the greatest love of his life. His promise to love Catherine past forever. A vow he honored every day by living fully and refusing to let grief destroy the joy she had brought into the world. And his final promise to Catherine, to keep living and loving after she was gone, which he had kept faithfully for the past 7 years. Jakob felt the weight of his years pressing down on him, knew that his own time was growing short. But he was not afraid. He had lived well, loved deeply, and kept his promises. When death came for him, he would face it with the same calm certainty he had brought to every challenge in his life. Samuel found him there an hour later, still sitting on the porch, a slight smile on his weathered face. The doctor would later say that Jakob's heart had simply given out, a peaceful passing without pain or struggle. But Samuel, who knew his father better than anyone, believed differently. He thought that Jakob had simply decided it was time to keep one final promise, the unspoken vow to be reunited with Catherine in whatever realm came after this life. At Jakob's funeral, the church in Redemption was packed with people who had come to pay their respects. Samuel stood and told stories of his father, the man who never broke a promise. Sarah spoke of Jakob's kindness and wisdom. Emma, now an elderly woman herself, shared the story of how Jakob had rescued her and changed the fate of 2 orphaned sisters. But the eulogy that people would remember for years afterward came from Jakob's oldest grandson, Samuel's firstborn son, who was also named Jakob. Young Jakob Stone stood before the assembled crowd and read from his great-grandfather's journal, the leather-bound book where Jakob had recorded every promise he had ever made. The last entry in this journal is dated the day before my great-grandmother Catherine died, young Jakob said, his voice strong and clear. It says simply this: I promise to love her past forever. That promise I have kept and will continue to keep until I draw my last breath and beyond. Catherine is the best promise I ever made, the greatest vow I ever honored. Everything good in my life came from her, and when I die, I will carry my love for her into eternity. Past forever. That is how long I will love her. He closed the journal and looked out at the gathered crowd. My great-grandfather taught me that promises are sacred, that your word is a measure of who you are as a person. But he also taught me that the best promises are the ones rooted in love, not obligation. He kept hundreds of promises in his life, but the one that defined him was the promise he made to love one woman past forever. He kept that promise every day of his life, and I believe he is keeping it still, wherever he is now. They buried Jakob next to Catherine on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone, which Sarah had commissioned from the finest craftsmen in the territory, bore a simple inscription. Jakob Stone, 1848–1921. He never broke a promise he loved her past forever as the years continued to pass. The story of Jakob and Catherine became part of the local folklore, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. But those who had known them understood that the truth was more powerful than any legend. Jakob Stone really had been a man who never broke a promise, who had spent his life honoring his word no matter the cost. And he really had loved Catherine Brennan with a love that transcended death, a love that lasted past forever. The ranch continued to prosper under the stewardship of Jakob's descendants, each generation learning the lessons he had taught about integrity, honor, and love. They told their children the story of how their great-great-grandfather had ridden into redemption as a broken man seeking redemption, and found instead something infinitely more valuable: a reason to live, a person to love, and a family to call his own. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Arizona desert painting the sky in impossible colors, the family would sometimes gather on the porch of the old ranch house and tell stories about Jakob and Catherine. They would talk about promises kept and loves that lasted beyond death, about the power of integrity and the importance of living a life that mattered. The youngest children would ask questions, wanting to understand how one man could keep so many promises, how one love could be strong enough to last past forever. And their parents and grandparents would smile and explain that it was not about being perfect or never making mistakes. It was about deciding what kind of person you wanted to be, and then having the courage to live according to those values every single day, no matter how difficult. "Your great-great-great-grandfather made a promise to the woman he loved," they would say. "He told her he would love her past forever. And he kept that promise through marriage and children, through good times and hard times, through her death and his own life after she was gone." That is the kind of love we all should aspire to, the kind that does not end when things get difficult but endures through everything. Past forever. That is how we should love. And so the legacy continued, passed down through the generations not as a burden but as an inspiration. A reminder that one person living with integrity and love could create ripples that would touch lives for generations to come. Jakob Stone had started his adult life by breaking a promise and spent the next decades making sure he never broke another. But in the end, his true legacy was not about the promises he kept to strangers, but about the love he built with one woman, the family they created together, and the example they set for everyone fortunate enough to know them. Past forever. That was how long Jakob Stone loved Catherine Brennan. It was not just a romantic phrase but a statement of absolute truth, a promise kept not just for a lifetime but for all eternity. And in the keeping of that promise, he had found redemption, purpose, and a joy that transformed everything he touched. The story of the cowboy who never broke a promise and loved his wife, past forever, became more than just a tale told around dinner tables. It became a standard by which people measured their own lives and loves, a reminder that true strength lay not in physical prowess or material success, but in the integrity to keep your word and the courage to love completely, without reservation or limit. Jakob Stone had lived that truth, and in doing so, he had created something that would truly last past forever. A legacy of love, honor, and promises kept.